Hi, we're doing the Great Depression. We're continuing with the Great Depression. Today is daily life on the farm. Yesterday was daily life in the city. Today is we're on the farm. Okay, so we're moving. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. I give you two?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I expect you to do twice the work. Okay.
Oh.
All right. Daily life on the farm during the Great Depression was a tough life. Okay, it was full of hard work and very few luxuries. Okay, many farmers, Brock, many farmers had been having a tough time since before the Depression due to overproduction, plunging prices. Okay, so farmers in the Midwest then, of course, had it especially difficult with the years of droughts and the dust storms also hitting at this during the Great Depression. Okay, but again, not every farmer was having a hard time growing crops. You know, down south, you could still grow crops. You were not suffering from a drought. They couldn't sell it. I mean, there wasn't a lot of selling their crops, but they could still grow food to eat for the family to eat and stuff. Okay. One advantage to living on a farm during the Great Depression is that farmers could indeed grow their own food. So they had vegetables, eggs, because they did have chickens, milk, because most of them had at least one milk cow. And all that was sometimes tough to come by in the city, of course. They even had meat occasionally from a sheep, a cattle, slaughtering a pig, of course, hunting, fishing.
But wouldn't most of the animals die because of the drought?
Just wait till we get to the interesting facts.
We're not everybody, again, not the entire country was not in a drought.
Not in every place.
But yes, in the Midwest, animals didn't survive the dust storms. It was hard for them to, they didn't have plenty of water to drink. So yes, but like in other areas of the country, they did have water and things of that nature. Yes.
Like in the Great Depression, like thousands and thousands of rabbits were everywhere destroying crops and stuff. And I heard the story one time about a farmer who got a bunch of his friends and they just went out and got a whole bunch of them because they were hungry.
Yep.
The farmers were hungry.
Yep.
But the jackrabbits were starving as well.
Nothing
So,
to them. That's why they come down out of the hills to eat the crops.
Yeah,
they're
they're
going
up
hungry
in
too.
the mountains in the brush, and then they come down to the big plains and fields.
They were going hungry too. Yeah. All right. Since farmers couldn't make a lot of money selling their crops, they had to make their own clothes. In many cases, they also made the most of the materials they had. So when a piece of clothing or a sheet or something like that wore out, then they would take the leftover parts, and like if you had a shirt that was maybe just had a hole in it, you would take another piece of material and patch that hole. Or if you had a sheet that was ripped up, you would cut away the good part and use it to make something. So nothing went to waste. Farm life was mostly hard work just to get by, but they did occasionally have some fun. Okay, farming families would gather together for dances, potluck dinners, which of course is when everybody brings in something, and it just kind of, you probably have them at your church sometimes, a potluck dinner, just you bring in different things and you kind of pick and choose what you want to eat. Okay, it's the same way. Kids would play outdoor games like kick the can, baseball. We used to jump rope. Hopscotch was a biggie. We had old tire swing out on a tree. One of my favorite pastimes when I was a kid was you had little toad frogs all over the place.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and I would take tobacco sticks and go out, and you'd find a toad frog, and you would kind of poke him in his butt, and he would jump, and then you'd go up and you'd poke him again, and he would jump, and you would chase that poor little frog around, kind of kind of poking him in the butt a little bit, not enough to hurt him, but just, kind of get his attention, and he would jump until eventually that poor little frog would just kind of look over his shoulder at you like, okay, just kill me with a stick. Just quit. Just let me, leave me alone. So, but I didn't kill him. Then you'd pick them up and they would tinkle on your hands, and you were supposed to get warts, but that's not true either. Yes, Morgan.
Did the Lone Ranger turn into like an actual
A TV show. It
Yeah.
did become a TV show later on.
Because my mom listens to this a guy who's on the radio. I think his name's Glenn Beck,
Mm-hmm.
and he does art, and he drew and he painted 2 characters from that TV show, and they were just amazing.
Yep. Brianna?
Like 2 or 3 summers ago, in North Dakota, my cousins live on a semi-farm. It has like its own runway, and like my uncle has planes there and stuff, so it's really big. And we took this big tub, like the size of the desk, and we caught all the frogs. We had like 4-wheelers, and we would drive them around. We like catch the frogs and put them in mini buckets and put them. We got about 50 frogs.
Oh yeah, if you find one, you'll find a bunch of others.
Bullfrogs are fun to catch.
We let them all go after that.
All right. So anyhow, but at night the families would gather around the radio, and they would listen to news shows, shows like The Lone Ranger, Amos and Andy.
Andy Griffith.
Both of those, Andy Griffin went on the radio. He came on TV. He didn't. He came out. He was in '60. If you would be quiet. Amos and Andy is not about Andy Griffith. Okay, that's not it. But both of these started off on the radio, as a number of the first TV shows did. They were actually radio programs that when TV actually came around, they developed them into TV shows. Okay? Some farm kids did attend school during the Great Depression. In some rural areas, the school was just a single room with a number of grades being taught by the same teacher. My mom and dad both attended schools like that, a one-room school with the same teacher. Okay? In fact, the first grade teacher, the woman that taught my father first grade, taught my mother, taught all of my brothers, and taught me.
Oh, that's
She
good.
taught every one of us.
That's kind
Not in a one, by that point, by the time my brothers and I came along, it wasn't a one-room school anymore, but she still, same teacher taught us all. She taught forever.
Just wouldn't quit.
She didn't quit. She was not married. She was
She was married to school.
she was an old maid. She loved children. And no, she was she was strict, but she was a very nice,
Well, yeah, when you have to teach
very
that many
nice,
kids, you
very
sort of
nice
have
woman.
to be. If you teach it
Okay,
that
very
many
nice
kids,
woman.
you kind of have to be a little
Yep.
strict.
Anyway, so children often had to walk a long way to school, which of course in the wintertime can be dangerous, or during dust storms if you're out in the Midwest. Even when the children were in school, though, they still had hours of chores to do each day on the farm. Leo can probably vouch for this. He lives on a farm. My job was to slop the pigs, okay, which means you took all the stuff left over out and threw it in the trough, and they ate that. I fed the chickens,
You watered
What
and
did you
then
feed them?
I milked the cows.
What'd you feed your chickens?
Just corn, just meal. And then in the afternoon, I had to milk the cow again. You had to turn her out, and then you had to bring her back in, and you milked her again. And then you gathered the eggs from the chicken, and you had to slop the pigs again, and then you had to chop wood. And there was always something to do. There was always chores. Okay? But looking back, it was actually, you hated it at the time, but it was actually a pretty good life.
You get milk.
All right, when drought hit the Midwest during the Great Depression, the soil turned to dust. Farmers in this region couldn't grow crops because there wasn't enough water. To make matters worse, the great dust storms formed in areas covering everything in dust. And of course, dust got everywhere and made life very difficult. The migration, this is when droughts and the dust storms, many farmers in the Midwest could not grow crops. They lost their farms. They had heard that there was work in California, so they actually would load up anything that they could get on their truck on top of a car and a trailer, whatever what they could do to get out to California. Whatever they could haul, they took with them. Otherwise, they just left it behind.
Like cattle and stuff.
Yeah, and once they got there, of course, they found out there weren't as many jobs as they had been told. Okay? In fact, we're going to watch a little film clip here in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking. They're going to be we're going to see when John Steinbeck wrote the book, The Grapes of Wrath, he describes what is going on a lot of these corporate farms and things in California. And of course, he is condemned. He is called a communist. Even the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, comes out and says, "Oh, none of that is true. That's not going on." And he was discredited. And then Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR's wife, actually goes to California and witnesses it firsthand. And she goes on the radio and says, "No, this is happening. This is actually happening." So it has a lot of credibility then back to this book. People kind of get an idea of what is actually going on. Okay? So although it wasn't easy, many farmers was able to survive during the Great Depression. They managed to grow and sell enough crops to pay their mortgage, to keep their farms. These families was usually located in areas of the country that was not hit by drought and dust storms, obviously. Now, some of the interesting facts: farmers had to deal with huge swarms of grasshoppers that would come out of nowhere and eat their crops. We're fixing to face that again this year. I believe this is the year of the locust. This spring and summer, you are going to have grasshoppers every 17 years. There will be millions of these things bouncing around. Okay? And if you're a farmer, that's not really good, because they will eat crops big time.
Are you capping?
Okay?
How do you get rid of them? Just kill them?
You can spray crops and try to keep them from eating them, but
I mean, if there was like millions, I would just start driving on them.
They
if they're not
eat
on
them.
purpose.
They eat them. Well, we're talking throughout the country. We're not talking just right here.
In the country.
Okay. Farmers sometimes would burn corn instead of wood to keep their homes warm. Now, when we say they burned corn, they did not just shuck the corn and throw it in. They would take and cut the kernels off, because they ate that.
Yeah.
But they burned corn. They burned the corn cobs is
The
what
cob,
they burned. Yeah.
And
Because wood was expensive. If you did not have trees around you that you could chop down, buying wood even in these days were expensive. Okay? In some area, people buy firewood all the
Why do
time.
you buy a fire?
Because people cuts down trees and cut it into little pieces of logs and sells it.
What if you live in New York? That's too much for
Okay.
His entire
Stop
driveway-
talking.
His entire driveway is filled up to like the height of you of
They're going to be shocked when I looked at the two of them and tell them to get out of my class. They're going to go, "What? What?" They sit here and talk the entire time.
man, literally his entire driveway is full with like year height all the way up with that much firewood. He has that much firewood just there because in his shed, he has an entire shed, and the entire shed is just firewood.
A lot of firewood.
They make
A lot of firewood.
And they don't even use it that much raw. He just
Oh, Lord.
me and my dad sell firewood. So
Yep. In some areas, thousands of starving jackrabbits, this is what Hart was talking about, came down from the hills, and they would eat the crops. Unfortunately, they were starving. Now, he was talking about how, he read a story, I think,
Yeah.
where the farmers would go out and try to kill the jackrabbits because they were like, "Hey, they're eating our crops, we'll kill them, we can eat them." But the truth of the matter is,
There's too many.
first of all, there's a lot of them, but second of all, they were starving too. That's why they were coming down out of the hills to eat the crops. They wasn't- So, there wasn't a whole lot to eat. They were already starving to death themselves. Farmers often use the leftover sacks from the animals' feed to make clothing and blankets. If you've ever messed with a feeding sack, they are not super soft. They're not like a pillowcase, These are some very coarse material,
Itchy.
and they could take that and kind of you can work it, you can rub rocks over it, you can do all kinds of things that will actually soften it up, believe it or not.
I bet if there was a way to make it stop for all them farmers figured
Oh, they figured it out, I guarantee it. All right, guys, thanks.